Now, let's give a warm welcome to Chris Penn and Katie Robbert. Take it away.
Good afternoon.
Hey, everyone.
So, it's 2015. I'm sitting in a conference room in England, and I was the VP of a marketing technology team. It was about 6 people at that point, 2 managers and then a couple of staff. And I had just fired my manager on the spot because he got drunk with a $54,000 a month client making fun of their English accent and not understanding anything about how to interface with clients. He was a really bad hire. Fast forward a couple of weeks, our team was down by about 50-ish% of capacity and things, and we needed to hire somebody else to take his spot. The other candidates that we had briefly talked to, even just looked at, were awful. They were.
The bar was low.
The bar. I stepped over the bar by accident, and I'm not tall. And so, on a whim, our HR manager reached out to somebody to say maybe could talk about what happened next.
So I was sitting in my cube on a Friday afternoon, and I got a call from a good friend of mine who I had known for about a decade. She was my former HR manager at that job, and she had since moved on and was now working with Chris. None of this I knew at the time. So I randomly got a phone call from her, and she said, I don't know if you're looking, but I have a job for you. And she didn't know, but I was looking. I was looking to make a move. I had been at my last job for about a decade, and that's a very long time in careers. And so I was like, yeah, I am making a move. So let's talk about it. So I went after hours after I'd finished that job and went over to the office, which was in another part of the town that we all worked in. And she sat down, she gave me the rundown, and she said that if you want to accept this role, the person that you would be working with is a little unconventional, so some people in this room do know Chris very well, and that was an understatement, to say the least. She did warn me that there were knives and weapons and other things hid around his office, and I thought she was kidding, to be quite honest, because I thought she was just trying to see how resilient I was to a difficult, manager or something like that. So I honestly didn't take it that seriously. And so I was like, okay, sure, I'll do the interview. So the following week, I came in before work. I came in around 7 a.m. and there was nobody there at the door to let me in. So I'm knocking. And if you don't know Chris walks incredibly fast.
I have to keep up with all you tall people.
And so he just comes strolling by, walking really fast, just kind of looks at me, opens the door, and then keeps walking, doesn't say anything. And I was like, okay, here we go. Brings me over to the interview room, doesn't offer me coffee, anything like that, just sits down and immediately starts rapid firing questions so fast, like I was having a hard time keeping up. And I was like, what is happening? And halfway through the interview, another person kind of wandered into the room, sat down, didn't say anything. I was like, oh, is this other person interviewing me? Chris got up and left, got himself some coffee. I was still sitting there, just had no idea what was happening. And then about 10 minutes later, the interview was over. So I left, went to my job, emailed my, friend Leah and said, thank you for the opportunity. I'm guessing I didn't get the job. So, okay, keep an ear out if you hear for anything else. She wrote back and said, you're in, he likes you. Do you want the job? And I said, I am so confused by everything that's happening right now. And I guess my understanding of the story is Leah said to you, what did you think? And you said,
it's okay. It's not bad.
Right. And that was it.
Yeah. Because the alternatives were, oh my God, this person's an idiot. Where did you find this person? Which was the last of the candidates.
So, needless to say, I started working with Chris. Now, you should know that in taking that job, I knew nothing of the marketing technology world. I came from clinical trials and product development, and I didn't really know any of the things that were going on with Chris and his team. And so my first day there, let alone trying to remember the faces of the people on my team, I'm hearing terms like CPA and ROI and things that to me at the time were just very foreign. And keep in mind, this was not that long ago. This was 2015. And so I was overwhelmed, in over my head. So what I had was my management training. I had done agile software development for about a decade, so I knew I could rely on that. And so that is what I started to introduce to Chris's team and basically turn it upside down because everybody thought I was nuts.
Yes. However, we went from a 6-person team doing about $500,000 a year in billing to a 10-ish, 11-ish person team, if you don't count that crazy intern, to the third highest billing team in the agency with about anywhere between $3 and $5 million in revenue in the span of 18 months. Part of the reason for this is because one of the things that we're doing in marketing the most wrong is not understanding that management is not the job, it is not the profession of marketing, right? Being a marketer, being a good individual contributor is really important. Being a manager is a separate profession. And what happens in every single company is you work, you get promoted to management. Right? And then you're like, okay, well, this is like, okay, you work. Now you're a surgeon. Like, what? And yet we do this to people in every single company. I can't think of a single company where an individual contributor can rise to the same level of status and pay as another executive without becoming a manager. And it turns out that as a manager, I suck. I'm a terrible manager.
This is 100% accurate.
Because...
But this is something that he and I have both had to come to terms with. So we can say this without any sort of disrespect or ego. Chris is a terrible manager and has no business managing people at all.
Right.
Or hiring them or general oversight of them.
Exactly. Because to me, as a technologist, as somebody who works with data science and AI and machine learning and marketing analytics and Google Analytics people are just more machines. Right? People, a person in a role is just another node in the network of things that you're doing. From my perspective as a technologist, right? And so I see this person here. This person is underperforming. Okay, let's look at their metrics. Their metrics are underperforming. They're underperforming a lot. Perhaps they need to go, right? Let's replace them with a different node. It turns out that doesn't really work with these things, right?
Needless to say, I had my work cut out for me, both with Chris, because at the time in that role, technically Chris was my boss, and then I was then responsible for his entire team. And one of the first things that I was charged with, and these were things that I figured out because Chris, to his credit, really had no idea what I needed to be doing with the team to fix it. So what I took on first was figuring out, do we even have the right people on the team? Which was when within about 30 days, I let Chris know, you are no longer allowed to hire people. Because he was hiring all the wrong people. And these were still inherently good people, but they were the wrong people for the roles, because it's not just about the hard skills, it's about the soft skills, which quite honestly, I feel is like, I hate the term soft skills, but it's about your ability to communicate. It's about your ability to critical think and problem solve and emote and understand your clients and where they're coming from. And those were not necessarily skills that Chris was looking for. Chris was looking for purely technical skills. And from where I sit, those are things that can be taught. You can teach someone technical skills if they have the right attitude and aptitude. You can't teach them how to, be empathetic. You can, but it's something like inherently people do or don't do. You can see if they have the right kind of attitude for those skill sets, and then you can build on them. But someone who isn't inherently empathetic to others, you're going to struggle to get them to do that kind of function in the job role. So I started evaluating the team, doing skills gap analysis to figure out, here's what we're doing, here's what we need to be doing, and we have this big gap in the middle. And the big gap in the middle was where I then had to start figuring out, do we start training people? Do we start moving people around? Do we start hiring new people? And the answer is we did all of it. We started moving people into different roles. We started looking for new team members, which was actually pretty interesting, because as I was hiring people and I said, this is a great candidate, I would have Chris talk to them just because they would need to be able to work with Chris. And every single person that I brought onto the team, Chris's first impression was, I don't like them.
Yeah, nope.
They don't fit in the team. And I was like, that means that they're a perfect fit. Great. And some of those people I remember very specifically became some of your favorite members. Yep. And you still, keep in touch with that person today. But your first impression of that talent was, nope, this person's never going to work. Became one of our best performers on the team.
And a big part of that is when you're hiring in particular, you bring a whole bunch of biases to the table. Whether or not you acknowledge that you have them and they influence you. And it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I'm only looking for other people who are short Asians. It means...
Definitely not me.
It means you look for people who are similar to you, who think similarly to you. And for the work that we were doing, that wasn't where the need was. Katie has come up with this 5-part framework, the 5 Ps: purpose, people, process, platform, and performance, right? Why are you doing the thing? Who's going to do the thing? What is the thing you're doing? With what do you do it with? And then did you do the thing? And as someone who is technical, I focus a lot on the platform, to some degree the process, but mostly coding the process so I don't have to do the process. And the outcome, can I measure the process? The most important and difficult parts, the purpose and the people, I largely ignore, which is not necessarily a recipe for success when a client says, here's our purpose, can you help us?
But it's a fairly common challenge with people who are technology first. And so that's not to say that it's a bad thing, but you need to recognize that you need that counterbalance. And that's one of the reasons why Chris and I are so successful together, is because in a lot of ways, we are the exact opposite, and it's very complementary. And so when we were still working at the agency and I was able to recognize that Chris was very focused on the technology, the performance, the numbers, the metrics, I started working with the team to understand, okay, do we have repeatable process? One of the first questions I asked the team was, where are your standard operating procedures? And they all looked at me like I had 5 heads. They'd never heard the terms before. And I was like, okay, where's your documentation of anything? And it didn't exist because it's not something that Chris, as the manager at the time, really felt was a priority. So I took that away from him and started having the team document what they were doing, because even simple things like client reports that were just pulling data out of one source, putting it into a PowerPoint presentation, needed to be done the same way every single time. And up until then, it hadn't been. It was
a crapshoot.
It was you do this, I don't know who does this. And so that was one of the first things we started to change, was we started to introduce some documentation, even if it's a really straightforward, step 1, step 2, step 3, then at least there's at least a foundation that you can start going back to. And we were able to start bringing more people on because it started to become a scalable thing, something that not just Chris could do, but maybe the senior analyst could do, maybe the marketing coordinator could learn how to do. And so we started with the process, and then I moved on to the people. Now, one of the reasons Chris is not allowed to hire is because when he doesn't factor in the personalities, he doesn't recognize if there's going to be a personality clash, which in the team that I inherited, there were huge personality clashes.
You didn't spend, 2.5 hours listening to 2 people break down in tears about whether Oxford commas were a good idea or not. That never happened.
You only got the 2.5 hour version. I spent 5 hours locked in your office with them and 4 boxes of tissues. This is a true story, by the way. They were fighting about the Oxford comma. And I believe at one point, one of the 2, team members was screaming something along the lines of, if she doesn't use AP style, then she doesn't represent this agency. And it was just, and I, at the time, just trying to diffuse the situation, made the mistake, just trying to get out of that room of, maybe you're both right. That is what kept us in that room an extra 3 hours, by the way, was that, and that was my mistake. And I own that, because we had to come to some sort of conclusion. Those were the types of conflicts that Chris was not equipped at the time to handle.
I'm still not.
Well, and so basically what he did to solve the problem was he brought in someone who was a professional manager, and that's what I am. I am a lightweight marketer. I am a lightweight technologist, but at my core, I'm a project manager and I'm a people manager. Those are the 2 things that I excel at, and those were the gaps that Chris had on his team. And so as he mentioned, we were able to grow the team from about $500,000 in revenue to about $3 million in revenue. I was only there for about 18 months. And then Chris and I decided to move on and do our own thing. But that was how quickly, once we started to right the ship, because he had someone who wasn't focused on marketing, we were able to do that with the team. We were able to bring on bigger, more interesting clients. We were able to retain our clients, client retention. We had one of the best client retention rates of the whole agency because we were able to start to move resources around in the right way, have dedicated resources for projects, have people that the clients could rely on and keep going back to, but also behind the scenes, we had a lot of process that allowed us to scale that the clients never saw. So they just got just a really great experience. They got exactly what they asked for. And behind the scenes, we were constantly automating and working on doing things in a repeatable way so that we could focus on the customer service. We could focus on the insights and action. And those are the big things that were missing from Chris's team prior to him bringing me on.
And then when the agency wanted to go in one direction, and we said, the future kind of looks like AI and data science. This is 2017. We parted ways, not in the most friendly, but that's another story for another time over drinks. We reversed roles, right? So Katie became the CEO, and I actually now report to Katie because I am a better individual contributor than I am a manager or anything else. And the challenge for organizations and for people in organizations is you have to have enough self-awareness in people to say, you're not good at this, or I'm not good at something, and be okay with that, especially when you have power structures like everyone has to be a manager where ego gets in the way. Ego gets in the way of someone saying, I'm not going to be a good manager. I'm not going to run this company well, right? And it took us probably a good 3 to 4 months. Actually, it was funny. We first decided to start our own company out in Santa Clara, California. We were visiting Justin and in a hotel lobby eating, questionable sushi because it was hotel sushi. There are things in life that should be reassuringly expensive. Sushi is one of them. And this hotel sushi, but we survived. We said, okay, well, how are we going to structure this? And it took us a couple of months to arrive at, when we look at the job of the CEO, the chief executive officer, the executive is running a company, right? The systems, the finance, the revenue stuff. Those are all things I'm bad at, right? So, and separating out the public perception of what a CEO is, which is usually a loud person, right, from the role of executing the business. And so, as we talk about marketing structures, management and leadership structures, one of the things we have to do is separate out what the public perception of a role is from what the actual duties are. I am still loud, right? I am still on stage as, a chief data scientist, or whatever, up here being loud. I don't have to be the CEO to do that. I just have to have something somewhat useful to say. But it took a while for me mentally to get to that point of saying, the title does not equal the things that we can do to make a company successful. And that's how we got to here. The second thing is that the processes that were involved in running the team at the agency and running the business of the agency were so interfering with what I was good at that we didn't grow beyond a certain point. Now, granted, we were working in PR, so I apologize if you're in the PR profession. PR is pretty far behind, so any technical improvement, it looks like, rocket science, and it wasn't. But in the first 3 months after we left the agency and started our own thing, I suddenly was not on the road 40 weeks of the year. I was not working till 10 p.m. every night, putting out client virus because the 8 hours of work were all meetings. And the amount of progress we made in fixing code and building new things literally was 10x, right? So just taking away all the noise during the workday and me stepping back to become just an individual contributor again made it possible to do stuff within months that I had thought about for years. We've been talking about building customer journeys, using Google Analytics data to say, okay, here's the channels that people take to become leads or whatever. And in your Google Analytics data, that exists. you can know person by person, here's exactly how they got to us. Here are the things that nurtured them along. Here are the things that pushed them over the edge to converting. But because I was so distracted by trains, planes, and automobiles and stuff, I never got to do that until we cleared away all the noise. And then once we did, it dramatically changed what we could do. So part and parcel of effective management and leadership is knowing that how to clear space for your individual contributors to say, okay, you need time to think. You need time to build stuff. You need time to experiment. 3M is often, cited as saying, well, we're going to give you a certain amount of time to work on your own projects. Google has the same thing. And a lot of people give that lip service, but most people are not innovators. So they need some level of coaching to do that as well, to say, okay, not only do you have time to work on stuff, but let's give you some direction. I'm fortunate enough that I'm a big enough nerd with no life outside of work that ideas come out and I'll just work on stuff. This morning at the roundtables, I was sitting next to Andy Crestadina and we were talking about SEO. Like, he was explaining his process of how to do an analysis of striking distance for keywords, looking at which keywords might be gold mines that are hidden. And I was sitting next to him going, well, I can code that. And so in about the span of 10 minutes, we wrote a new software product. So, okay, I was going to tell you this later. But without that space, that freedom in your brain to think, you can't do that. It won't happen.
Now, on the flip side of that, as Chris is saying, he struggled with the perception of an individual contributor. I struggled with the perception of being a person in charge. Like, if you know me, I love being in charge, but I'm very bossy. But I'm an introvert. And so that idea of having to have some sort of a big public persona in order to be a CEO freaked me out, because that's not who I am. I don't want to have a big public persona. I don't want to be on stage all the time. Occasionally is fine. And so that was something that I struggled with, but was able to sort of move past in order to say, you know what? There's lots of examples where the CEO isn't the best known person in the company, somebody else is.
Right.
And we were very comfortable saying, that can be Chris. Chris can be the voice, the face, the public persona of Trust Insights. I don't need to be. I have enough things to do to keep things moving forward, to focus on growth, to focus on product development, to quite literally keep Chris focused on doing the thing. And so while I've given him the space and the time to innovate and create, he can do whatever he wants. When we bring it into the company is when I get involved and start to figure out does anybody want this? Does anybody need this? What the heck does this thing do? Which brings me to maybe aside from what is Chris like in real life, the most common question I get asked is, how can a non-technical manager manage a technical team? And that's one of the things. I managed software development for, as I mentioned, about a decade. And what I've learned, ask a lot of questions. And so it's very intimidating for a non-technical manager to walk into a situation with someone like a Chris, who's a data scientist, very deep into technology, and have any idea what they're talking about. To be quite honest, I mean, how many times a day do I literally say to you, yep, you just said a bunch of words that I have no idea what any of them mean?
So on Thursdays, we have a live stream called So What? That the name of the show comes from Katie repeatedly asking, so what?
Yeah.
So for example, this morning, we just created this thing, creating striking distance analysis of keywords from Google Search Console to identify pages. Now that Katie knows about this, the first thing she's going to ask is, so what?
So the process that we will go through is, my first question will say, what is the practical application of this? Who would use it? Why would somebody use it? And so what I've learned over the course of my career managing technical teams is the approach isn't, I don't understand what you're saying, explain it to me like I'm dumb, because you're not dumb. You just don't have the technical aptitude that somebody else has. But asking different questions like, help me understand who would use this. Help me understand how I, as a marketer, would take this off the shelf and apply it to the job I do every day. That does a couple of things. One, you start to understand, like, does this even have legs? Is it even really a thing? But also, it starts to slow down the technical person a little bit to think through, well, how would I use it? Is this just a cool piece of code? Cool piece of code that I developed to curate a birthday list for one of my friends, which is something that Chris did last week. And I said, yeah, there's no application for that. You can shelf that.
I thought it was cool.
But that's the thing. And allowing your technical team the space and time to innovate and create those things is going to keep them happy and satisfied. So you allow them to do that. But then your job as the manager of those technical resources is to rein in what they're doing when it applies to the business, when it applies to your customers. And the way you do that, at least that I found to be the most successful, is using the 5P framework. And as Chris mentioned, it's just answering 5 basic questions. Purpose. What is the problem we're trying to solve with this thing? What is the point of it? People. Who's involved? Who needs to create this thing? Who wants this thing? Who asked for this thing? Who needs to maintain this thing? Understanding that is the thing that's most often skipped over when developing any kind of technology.
Well, let's go through this. So we have this new SEO thing, right? I probably haven't explained the purpose, right?
Yeah. What is it?
So the purpose is to find pages on your website that are almost good, right? They're almost on page 1 of Google. And we want to get our pages to page 1 of Google for relevant search terms. And right now we have a whole bunch that are not on page 1. So this tool says, let's knock out the ones that are already on page 1 because we don't want to damage those.
Okay.
We just want to find all the gems, the hidden gems. So the purpose is, I want to find pages to optimize that have a good chance of making it over into the winning bucket.
Okay, so that's a pretty solid purpose. And as someone who's not technical, I still understood everything that Chris said. Right. So my understanding,
more search traffic.
You want to find everything that's not on page 1 so that you can optimize it to put it on page 1. Great, super straightforward. He didn't even have to get into the weeds of what it is he's doing. Who are the people involved?
Me.
So that's not sustainable. And this, for us, if you don't know, Chris and I, this is 2/3 of our company. And so one of the challenges that we face is getting Chris to document and create things in such a way that he can train someone else. That's what we're focusing on in 2023, not to get too into the weeds of our business, but when someone is presenting you with some sort of new technical shiny object, that's always my first question is, are you the only person who can create this thing, or can somebody else do this? Could they learn how to do it? And it sounds like right now, the answer is no.
Correct.
So this is where I would stop in the line of question to say, okay, we need to figure out how you can create it in such a way that someone who isn't you could run this thing, because the purpose is solid. It's a great use case. A lot of people would be interested in a tool like that. I'm interested in a tool like that. But the process right now, to me, is not workable. So that's where we would stop and work out the process before we even got into platform and performance, because the platforms, I'm guessing, are things like R. They're things like APIs, which for some people are no big deal, but we don't have anyone else on our team who can do that. So we then need to, before we even get into platform, we need to determine the process that can be repeatable, trainable.
And when you're dealing with technical people, and especially when you're dealing with agencies, this process is really important, because if you follow it and if you just keep asking, so what? If the person who is explaining it just keeps repeating themselves and doesn't actually explain in language that you understand, they don't know what they're doing. They're bullshitting you, right? At the end of the day, we can step back and say, explain pretty much anything with enough time and enough of somebody like Katie can say, I'm going to be the voice of the customer. Right. What is this thing? Over lunch today, we were talking about how the AI models behind, DALL-E 2 that you saw in Paul Bretzer's keynote, how that works, right? And Carol and I were talking about this over lunch. It took me 45 minutes to keep explaining in progressively more abstract ways that were less technical how that thing does what it does. And we got there in the end. I'm still not personally satisfied with the explanation, because I think it's got some tweaking, but I was able to do it because I know what I'm doing with this stuff. When you have, I've heard engineers, actually salespeople are the worst. I've heard salespeople especially just throw out a bunch of words, hope that you don't ask questions, and then the moment you ask them a question, they're like, I need to find a sales engineer. Right? And if you've done any kind of B2B software procurement, you know this intimately. The number one red flag and easiest test of any B2B software vendor is to say, hey, can I talk to one of your engineers without you present? If they say yes, the chances are they don't have anything to hide. when we're talking about vendor procurement, if on the other, like, no, we need to escort our engineers so they don't say anything dumb. Like, no, our product doesn't do that.
But now, see, this goes back to the hiring and the growth. As you're thinking about, the technologists on your team, you also need to be looking for someone who has at least some level of communication skills, because the onus on the technologist to explain what it is that they're doing is big. Because it could be, Chris can get super deep into the weeds with regression and lasso and all kinds of words that I've heard him say a million times. But if you asked me what they mean, I couldn't tell you. I could fudge my way through it, and you would know that I was BSing you. I'm not the person who needs to communicate it. Chris is the person who needs to communicate it, and this is where we work really well together, because I act as that sort of sandbox, that test person, as I'm acting as the voice of the customer, as I'm acting as the voice of the client, as I'm acting as the voice of people who have never heard of us, and we don't want to scare them away by sounding too overly complex. And so this is one of the reasons why our relationship works really well, because I have no problem saying to Chris, you need to try again. And Chris has no problem saying to me, I don't think you were listening to what I was saying. Let's just keep doing it until we get it to a point where we both feel comfortable that it's the correct explanation and it's, not damaging our integrity in terms of we've quote unquote dumbed it down too much. Because what Chris does is actually very advanced and technical, but we need to bring it to a larger audience in such a way that's not intimidating or overly complex that they feel like they need a dictionary while Chris is explaining it.
And the 7 personality traits that seem to work well to find people when you're hiring people are these. Number 1, someone who's open, who can communicate, who's willing to communicate. If you ever dealt with a technical person who did not want to communicate with you, you know exactly what this is like when you talk to IT. They just have no interest in talking to you. 2, resilient. So when something fails, the person can get back up and do it again, right? For technical people, for individual contributors, and for managers, that's a persistent trait. 3 is curious. The greatest danger to innovation in any company is in curiosity. People saying, nope, this is the way we've always done it. Okay, then you're going to get what you've always gotten, except you won't, it'll get worse. The 4th is patience. This is something I'm especially bad at, but sure, having a good team and good managers can make that workable. The 5th is being persistent, which kind of goes with patience to a degree, of making sure that you keep going even when you don't see a lot of progress. Again, as a manager, I'm a terrible manager because I don't give people enough time because I'm impatient, and I push people too hard instead of letting them be persistent on their own. Number 6 is humility, which is partly I would call almost self-awareness of knowing what you're good at and what you're bad at. A person who is self-aware is a great hire, right? A person who is not self-aware is going to implode at some point, no matter what. And if you work for somebody who is dramatically unself-aware, update your LinkedIn profile, because sooner or later that's not going to go well. And the last one is being passionate about something, whether you're in SaaS sales, whether you're in technical engineering, whether you're in management. Someone who is passionate is going to keep learning and keep growing. And someone who's not, they're not going to do that thing, right? What I do outside of work, I write code and stuff outside of work for fun because I'm curious and passionate about learning how to do cool stuff. I like to make cool stuff. That passion then is something I can bring into work. That's not to say you have to work around the clock, right? You're allowed to have a life outside of work. But when you're looking at people that you might want to partner with or hire, it does help. We're down the last few minutes, so I wanted to cover the last thing that is really important, and that was one of the driving factors by why we left our company. And by the way, our entire team imploded shortly thereafter, is the values. Values and outcomes. It's kind of funny. On the Trust Insights website, you'll see a list of core values. And we stand for these things. There's a secret version of here's all the shit we hate and the exact person that we didn't like working with at our past jobs, and that the values come from. So we have one that says we believe in being clear, right? Because so-and-so jackass couldn't get 2 sentences out of his mouth without throwing 5 buzzwords in it because he was an idiot and didn't know anything as bad at his job. As you think about creating things like that for yourself, whether it's for your team, for your management, for your leadership, having that list of here's all the people that pissed you off and the things that they do, you can create a positive version, but becomes a really good guiding code for how to build a mission and a vision people can get behind, because they look at it and go, oh, I see why you value these things, especially when you take them drinking later and they're like, oh yeah, so-and-so was an asshole and that's why that's in that list. But the other thing is, in our old company, we had clients that we didn't have a choice, right? We were given a client, we were given a prospect to pitch and win, and we did. But there were clients like, yeah, we don't want to work with you because you make the world a worse place. We had this one company that was a ocean deep drilling company, and they wanted some help with public relations. Like, well, you do drill giant holes in the ocean, spill oil everywhere, and kill ecosystems. I'm not sure how we can spin that positively. And they said, well, everywhere the oil industry goes, prosperity goes. Yes, so does pollution. We couldn't say no. We could not say no to them. And that was one of the main reasons we left, that and all the other bad management. Now, one of the things we're able to do is someone can come to us and say, you know what, we don't feel comfortable working with you, right? We're not the right partner for you. We had a company that came in that had a very specific political thing that they wanted to work on. And we're like, nope, we're not going to work with you. We don't like that color of hat. So the non-Americans don't are like, oh, okay. But those values and outcomes are really important. If you want to retain people, you've got to show them what you stand for, and you've actually got to do it. And that's the hardest part, is if your company does not give you the latitude to say, no, we're not going to do that, you're going to struggle to retain people.
So I know that we wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions as well, but a question I have for you, Chris, is, so obviously, as we've stated through our history and our story, I didn't start out managing you. You started out managing me.
I'm so sorry.
And well, so this leads into the question, because as you've stated, you have no patience. Mm-hmm. You struggle to manage people because they don't make progress fast enough. And yet somehow you never fired me and I'm not a technologist. Mm-hmm. And so I was hoping that maybe you could speak a little bit to that as to, now, to be fair, at least every day for the first 3 months of me working for Chris, I think he was trying to get me to leave, because he would tell me that my center of gravity was inefficient, and he would tell me like the 6 different ways that he could, using martial arts, overpower me. And I was like, cool. So here's everything we have on the list today.
Well, I mean, if HR didn't object to the machete in my office, clearly they.
But I think the question I'm trying to get at is, so you as a technologist managing a non-technical person, which is also a situation you find yourself in sometimes, you had to train me on things. Mm-hmm. And so can you speak a little bit to that experience?
Well, here's the thing. People who are really good at something, it shows, right? If someone is a really good chef, you can just see through the motions, like how they cut. Okay, this person is good at this. And I can look at somebody who's like a world-class sushi chef or a Michelin star chef and watch them go, okay, this person really knows their stuff. And I know I can't do that, right? I don't have Dunning-Kruger syndrome. Like, oh, well, I'm a guy. I can clearly do that. Like, I'll lose a finger that way. You are an outstanding manager of people. You understand it. And so when I watch how you work, it's the same as watching somebody, an expert plumber. Like, they just know exactly where to fix to fix the thing. And so I have enough self-awareness to say, I shouldn't try and tell you how to do a profession that I don't understand. Right? I don't understand management. I could probably work to build a framework if I had to, but that's not what I'm good at, right? I could probably learn how to be an expert auto mechanic, right? It would take a really long time. It's not the best use of my time. Mm-hmm. So in terms of managing somebody like that, it's kind of like managing a technical person. You say, okay, what are you good at? Mm-hmm. What is in your way that I can get out of your way, right? What do you need for resources? And then how quickly do you need me to shut the hell up and let you do your job?
Immediately. But as we talk about technical versus non-technical team members, that is sort of how you start to figure out how, if you're on the non-technical side like I am, how to work with someone who is a technologist. You figure out, here's the things that you're really good at. Help me understand what it is, the value, blah, blah. And then you create the space for them to do that. One of the things that we see go wrong a lot, as Chris mentioned, is people are thrown into that role who are better as an individual contributor than they are as a manager. And that is really a recipe for disaster. People can learn how to manage, but there is a reason why there is just a profession of management. And so if you're looking to bring someone onto your team to sort of right the ship, look for someone who isn't an individual contributor, who isn't necessarily a technologist, but someone who's a professional manager. A project manager is a great manager of a team. A product manager, probably a great manager of a team. They have the technology background, but as a product manager, you're sort of overseeing all the things, all the different teams. You're a communicator. Those are the people that you would want to look to bring on to manage the team versus doing the thing.
Let me ask you a question. Quick show of hands. How many of you really enjoy doing mathematics, particularly advanced mathematics? Just a show of hands. Okay, like, how many people feel comfortable, at least comfortable doing mathematics, basic analytics and stuff? Okay, all right. The same percentage of people should be managers, right? Most of the room did not raise your hands, being comfortable doing analytics. Most of us probably are not necessarily going to be great managers unless we enjoy it. We're comfortable doing it. You have any questions from the online folks? Ashley's got a question.
Oh boy.
Make it a good one.
So as an individual contributor turned manager, one of the things I struggle with most is how to build up and manage other managers, because I'm also a control freak. So do you have any advice on how to grow like the next level of manager when you aren't individually managing every single person?
The biggest challenge for someone who moves from individual contributor to manager is the ability to delegate, the ability to trust your team to do the work exactly how you would do it and how you would execute it. And that's where having really solid process is your best friend. And so that was one of the things that we struggled with on our old team, was that Chris had a certain expectation of how things should be done. And in order to trust the team to allow them to execute, I had to sort of sit down with Chris and document, okay, how do you do it? Give me the exact steps so that then we can train other people so that he could sort of be removed from the equation and that he could then focus on the things that he's good at. And then I, as the manager, you say, here's how the thing is done. I've worked with the subject matter expert. I know the thing. He has trained me on it. Now I can turn around and train you on it. And it really comes down to that process and that repeatability. And so there's things that Chris does that we will never really have process for, but they're unique and they're one-off. And that's okay. As long as the majority of what we do is repeatable, does have a process, then I can have Chris delegate it out and say, this is what they created. Now you just have to take a look at it and make sure that nothing went sideways. And so that would be my recommendation, is delegation is hard unless you give people the exact steps, and giving them the exact steps means writing the process, documenting it. And there's a lot of time up front, but once it's done, it's done.
The other thing I would add to that is you have to define expectations. This is really hard for me to say, okay, this is the thing, this is how I do the thing. The client's expectation or the customer's expectation may be 60% of that. So as long as the person we're delegating to can do it 61% or better, even if it's not to my standard of 100%, I have to be okay with saying, okay, 61% is good. If we promise the client 60% of the output and they're getting 61, the client's probably happy. If they get to 70%, the client's probably deliriously happy, right? And so part of the challenge that I've always had as a manager, particularly managing other managers, is what is the expectation that the customer wants? And then how easy is it to get to that? Because it does get watered down. The more layers of management you have, the faster your performance gets watered down without a good process in place. The process, when we talk about process, we're really talking about recipes, right? Can somebody cook the recipe 60% as well as Gordon Ramsay? Probably, right? You know, if you follow the directions, you can probably cook something. It will not be what Gordon Ramsay cooks, but it's probably going to be better than what I would have come up with on my own. But without a recipe, just trying to wing it based on what you see on YouTube, that's just a disaster. And the same thing is true for management.
The other thing I would say about moving from individual contributor to management is you go from it being all about you to it being not about you at all. And so as a manager, it's never about you.
Everything is your fault.
Everything is your fault and nothing is your success. And to be an effective manager, you have to let go of your ego. You have to let go of, it's not that you're letting go of your identity, your ambitions, all of those things still matter. But in the day-to-day, it is not about you. Whereas as an individual contributor, it is 100% about you. And that is something that once Chris and I were able to figure out that that was the better dynamic, it's not about me. If Chris succeeds, I succeed. If Chris fails, I fail. But it's not the other way around. If Chris succeeds, he succeeds. It has nothing to do with me. So we needed to figure out, with the larger team, he brought on someone who was able to put their ego aside, who didn't need to take credit for things. And that's not to say taking credit is a bad thing, but when you're a manager, you don't get to take the credit. You get to take all of the crap that comes with it, the failures, but you don't get to take the credit. And if you can find someone who's okay with that, they're going to be a good manager.
And the systems and structures we have in place right now in corporations are the exact opposite, right? Think about the awards ceremonies internally. What gets glorified? Who gets promoted, right? It is the exact opposite. So part of the reason we call this session Reimagining Marketing Management and Leadership is not because we're presenting something that's radically new, but we're highlighting that the existing systems and structures in place are prioritizing the wrong things, and it is almost universal. There's no room for individual contributors to rise without becoming managers. Right. Management is largely broken, and our values and things are out of whack with the priorities of retaining talent and expanding and growing. Any other questions?
I think we're really tight on time, so we're going to have to go to the post-presentation huddles if that's okay.
Thank you very much,
So
folks.
thank you again to Chris and Katie.